Hi, this is Ellen Burke, and welcome to my Ed Talk on the book that we're reading, The First Year of Teaching. This was some really interesting chapters 6, 8, 9, and 11. What we talked about in these chapters were a variety of topics that went through language and discipline and really made me ask some questions of myself and how I'm going to run my classroom as well. We talked about um, how students use and respond to their primary language in Chapter 6, and what it is for students to express ideas and display critical thinking more accurately in their primary language. In taking the ELD class that we took, obviously our concentration there was on facilitating for students that had English as their second language. But I really like how the author utilized the research here to find out whether or not there may be a need for us to generate some type of either classroom activity or content for students in a desired school that might be more relatable to how a student could express deeper level of thought in their own primary language, which is something I never ever thought about. I think that it has an impact on how students relate to each other, how they respond to their instructor, and just their comfort level and the trust that they have in the content itself. So if they're able to display more critical thinking and deeper thought in their primary language, that might be something that we take a look at some time at some point. I also thought it was interesting some of the proficiencies from passing from one level, ELD level, to the next, and I thought that was interesting in the respect that the English language part I knew about from other classes, but just to find out what the embedded proficiency was in addition to that. So it may not always be students learning how to study and pass the English language, but also what that embedded proficiency layer might do to skew the results of those level tests. So I enjoyed that chapter. I thought it was interesting. And one of the quotes I put on here is, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. And I like this quote. I've heard it before. I think that students need to feel empowered regardless of what language they're in. The next couple chapters, we talked about discipline and the self. We worked on, in these chapters, we looked at what it is to restore discipline in schools and give meaning to, words like empathy and healing and love, learning, integrity, fearlessness. That can be in a classroom or in the culture of the school. But it was an interesting study that they talked about. I thought that the outcome of the conversation with the two girls that were fighting was interesting, and also teaches students habit of mind so that they're able to develop emotional literacy and work through problems as they get more responsible in their relationships, their social relationships with each other. I liked in the study how everybody had an equal voice and how they practice meaningful healing and empathy. I thought that study was pretty interesting, and I enjoyed reading that particular part of the chapter. The next ones that we go through are chapter 9 and 10, and this gives some information on what teachers do to turn problems into possibilities. I guess we all do that all day long. The demands that we have as a researcher versus being a teacher. Combining those two things is really tricky, especially when you're new, and that's something I'm struggling with right now. I know that there are certain things that I need to look up and research and get ahead of so that I can comfortably teach either a section or a topic, or just be able to facilitate discussion a little bit better. So I'm always playing the or prioritizing exactly where my emphasis needs to be, if it's a teacher that minute or a researcher that minute. So I find I do more research now than I ever have in my life, which is fine. I like it. But there's not always a lot of time. So the other thing in the reflection that for chapter 11, reflecting on urban teaching then and now, that I thought was helpful to me personally, was to learn to just do my best and accept what I have as maybe a perceived failure might not necessarily be um, exactly what the students are thinking. So obviously, as teachers, we know not to take it personally, but you want your students to do well. And when they don't, you feel like it's your fault that they didn't. And so that's something I think that I'll probably have to work on, because I'm competitive and I want to do my best. So I want them to do their best as well. Thank you for listening.